This sustainability series and episode is brought to you by our friends at IMC Logistics, the largest marine drayage company in the nation and a true leader in sustainable supply chain solutions.
IMC is investing in a greener future with zero emission trucks, clean fuel initiatives, and smarter logistics strategies that reduce emissions and improve efficiency without compromising service.
At IMC Logistics, sustainability isn't a slogan, it's a commitment to building a better supply chain for generations to come. Learn more at imcc.com.
Now, let's dive into today's conversation on sustainable innovation in global logistics.
Welcome to Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. I'm Kevin Parkerson.
And I'm Kevin Higgins. Together we bring you over 60 years in combined experience in global logistics.
In each episode, we'll dive into the latest industry trends, share practical tips, celebrate wins, and share stories from the logistics front lines, all while helping businesses optimize their logistics operations.
Welcome to Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. This episode kicks off our new series, Sustainable Supply Chain, Moving the Future Forward, where we explore the biggest challenges and opportunities facing supply chain as they push forward a more sustainable future. And what better way to start than with today's guest, Jim Gillis, President of the Pacific Region at IMC Logistics, who also happens to represent the sponsor of this episode, IMC Logistics. With over 27 years in the industry, Jim has been a driving force behind the transformation of intermodal operations on the West Coast and Nevada, leading IMC's expansion, launching new brands, and spearheading initiatives toward a zero-emission future. Under his leadership, IMC is at the forefront of electric and hydrogen-powered trucking, setting the standard for sustainability in drayage.
Beyond his role at IMC, Jim is a recognized thought leader, serving on the boards of the Harbor Trucking Association and the California Trucking Association. He's also a featured speaker at the 2025 Advanced Clean Transportation Expo, where he'll share insights on the future of sustainable logistics. Jim, welcome to the show. We're excited to dive into your journey, your vision for the future of drayage, and how IMC is leading the charge in sustainable logistics.
Welcome, Jim.
Well, thanks, guys. How are you doing today?
Doing good.
How was that for an intro? Is that
good
really?
To have you?
Have you done all that, Jim?
What's that?
All the intro. Yeah.
Man, I was waiting to meet the guy you guys were just talking about. So what an honor and a great introduction. But now, seriously, it is an honor to be on with you guys today. I love your programming and everything you guys have been doing for the last couple of years.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Jim. And we did probably meet at one of the HTA functions because in a former life, we had chassisfinder.com, and we were active with Weston and the group when we did a chassis specific fleet for the Harbor Trucking Association back around 2015, I think. So we probably met. So it's good to have you.
Yeah. Thank you again.
So, Jim, you've been really at the forefront of IMC's push for a greener future, especially in the state of California. So, but before we dive into that, can you share a bit about your career journey? How did you get started in logistics, and what led you to champion sustainability in the drayage trucking industry?
Yeah, I kind of happened into logistics. I think everybody has the same story. Nobody ever started off to be a logistics person, but I was in the Navy and got out of the Navy and was in Dallas, Texas, which is where I had entered service. And I had it in my head I wanted to be an attorney. So I went to work for a family friend while I was studying up for LSATs, and he happened to work for the Teamsters. He was a Teamster attorney for Teamster 745. And I was working part-time for him and realized that I needed to make some money. So he had me, got me on board with the Teamsters, and I started working for Nation's Way Transport in Dallas. and realized pretty quickly didn't want to be a dock worker for the rest of my life. And I answered an ad and went to work for a carrier in Dallas that was the house carrier for Sealand Services. And I had no idea what a container was. Went and interviewed with these folks, and just kind of got thrown into the fire of container shipping pretty rapidly. And, found out that I had a talent for dispatching, right? Really enjoyed it, enjoyed dealing with the drivers, and, left there about 6 months later and went to work for Intermodal Cartage Company, which is a precursor for IMC Logistics, and really stayed with them the majority of my career, and all over Texas, all over the Southeast, and then finally made the jump. We purchased a company in California called Progressive Transportation in 2016. And our chairman, Mark George, asked me to come out and take leadership and kind of reform our efforts on the West Coast. So I moved out here in 2017.
That's awesome. What year did you start at Sealand?
Well, we were a house carrier for Sealand, so wasn't necessarily working for those guys.
Right. Okay.
It was in 1997, and then I did have the opportunity back in 2001, 2002 to become an implant within Sealand, and so IMC sent me, and I actually was in Alpha Road, the headquarters for Sealand, and I was doing sales and processing orders for IMC via Sealand, and a very exciting job. Lasted about a year, and then I got sent back to the trenches to dispatch trucks and do a little bit more leadership.
There you go. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, Jim, this is part of our inaugural episode for the sustainability series. So I have to ask you, there's been a big shift in the logistics industry towards sustainability in the last decade or so. I would say, from your perspective, what's the driving force behind this movement?
I think it's really consumer behaviors, right? And especially when you're dealing with BCOs from Europe, those seem to be the folks that are, they've been working with sustainability for years now, and it's kind of old hat to them. Where American BCOs are really just starting to catch on. But I think, when we're looking at companies to target and talk about sustainability, we're working for, we're looking for customers that are dealing with that demographic 18 to 35. They seem to be hyper focused on sustainability and really marketing to the millennials or Gen Zs, whatever you call that age group now.
So what are the challenges, of getting adoption of sustainability with your core customers?
It changes month by month and day by day, it seems, right? Obviously, what we're experiencing today and certainly over the last couple of years, a freight recession makes it a little bit harder and a tougher sell to go tell a customer, hey, listen, I can do this with a different type of truck. It's going to cost you a little bit more. And so, early on, 3 years ago was easy, right? And folks were very, they're hyper focused on it. And yes, I want to do this. And then I think, as we started seeing, a little bit more capacity in the market and freight rates dropping like a rock, I think that, customers are really looking at the economics of it. You still have folks that are hyper focused, right? And they really stand by their company's position and they want to make an impact on the environment. But, those are the unicorns of the world, right? They're hard to find.
They are.
Most folks are really looking at the economics. And so it is tough. It's a tough sell today.
Yeah. And there's, to me, there seems to be, there's a lot of discussion around this, not just on the trucking side, but just in general, right? But our infrastructure as a country doesn't really lend itself to, full blown adoption of, like EVs and things like that. So are you, how are you guys running into that, and kind of how are you addressing that from your perspective?
Well, it's one of the chicken the egg, conversations, right? So I had a good discussion yesterday with Noel Hasagava, and we're talking about electrical infrastructure. And last year, the Port of Long Beach had really devoted a lot of funds towards developing electrical infrastructure around the port. And now they've got about 300 charging locations that are close proximity to the port. There's just not enough trucks right now, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem they've got now, is that with the demise of ACF in California, the competitive landscape, folks are really not looking for zero emissions trucks. And so, a guy like me with a large fleet of zero emissions, we're competing today with folks that have 2014 diesels, and they obviously have a much lower cost structure. So it's tough. But getting back to the infrastructure, problem, I think that Southern California has really done some good things, right? And the ports have really led the way to develop infrastructure for battery electric. Hydrogen, not so much, right? Hydrogen is way behind the curve. There are a handful of temporary stations right now, and I think really only one or two permanent stations. And so there's a long way to go for hydrogen. When you get up into Northern California, that landscape doesn't exist at all. So very few battery electric for Class 8 tractor infrastructure for charging, and really hydrogen doesn't exist at all. So I think that we've got a long way to go. But I'm hopeful. We've talked to a lot of folks, especially on the hydrogen side, and it seems like there's a lot of investment coming for hydrogen. I think we're about 18 to 24 months away, though, from really seeing significant progress in California.
So on that topic, Jim, I know California has some of the strictest emission regulations. Are there policies helping or creating maybe unintended hurdles for businesses like IMC?
Sure. I think that the complicated part about being in California is the changing regulatory landscape, right? So from day to day, it's like, man, you don't know what to do. It's very hard to plan business in California, because if you do things on the straight and narrow, it's tough to make money, right? And so when we came out here, we decided, hey, we want to become a leader. We want to do things the right way. We converted to the employee model for our operation out here, and then said, hey, let's go and really follow the path that California is laying with sustainability. And then all of a sudden, you see what happened last year with the ACF being put on hold. And then all of a sudden the waiver request is withdrawn, and it becomes difficult for large scale operators. I know folks like us, many larger fleets are struggling right now trying to figure out which is, what way is up.
Yeah, that's got to be challenging. I can't even imagine. I know when we were dealing with chassis, 10 years ago, that all started around 2009 when they started divesting. That just the changing landscape on that was hard enough to keep up with. I can't imagine what you guys are having to deal with, from this perspective, from a regulatory perspective in this particular issue.
Well, yeah, and then you throw in the federal administration, right? And so I feel a lot of calls on a weekly basis from customers saying, well, with the new federal administration, I guess we don't have to worry about sustainability in the West Coast,
right?
But you still have some interesting legislation, especially with the indirect source rule, that's really continuing to push California that direction. And then you've got some stuff percolating in Sacramento that really may change the landscape for sustainability long term if they go to a statewide indirect source rule, which really commercializes this issue and takes it away from the legislature.
One thing I wanted to kind of get to, and I was trying to figure out I think, are the Olympics in 2028 out there in Southern Cal? Is that the year?
They are, yes. They're in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so 2028's a big year, and I bring that up because I believe IMC is targeting a full zero emission vehicle status in California by 2028. Can you maybe share with the audience maybe steps that are being taken to make that goal a reality?
Yeah. So, like I told you, when I came out here in 2017, we really converted to the employee model in 2020. And at that time we said, hey, let's go full force with sustainability. We got to make sure that we've got the right technology on board. And we started with toe in the water approach, right? Battery electric trucks. We had some Volvos. We went out and got some infrastructure for one of our facilities, and some moderate success, right? What I didn't like is it didn't really replicate the diesel experience for a driver, right? It was a cleaner environment for the driver. They love the comfortability of the truck, but 150 miles down the road, you have to get out of the truck, and we'd have to find a place to charge that thing for 2 to 3 hours, and that just doesn't really work for our business, right? We have so much business going to the Inland Empire that we decided, well, we need to go out and look for alternative sources of zero emission. And so we stumbled on the Nikola truck. We had looked at their battery electric truck, but I found that it was way too heavy for us. And they said, well, take a look at this hydrogen fuel cell. And I had no idea what a hydrogen fuel cell was, but we did some exploration on it. We went to the grand unveiling of their truck in Arizona, and spent a lot of time talking to the folks that were designing and really constructing it, and fell in love with it, right? So we ended up doing a small purchase order initially of 10, and I expanded that to 50 pretty quick. Wow. And to date, we've put about 1 million miles on those trucks, and really find that the technology is awesome, right? It replicates diesel. A guy can get into that truck, 500 miles later, he gets out, and then we'd have a refuel experience. It's 20 to 30 minutes. Another driver gets in, and we've got a real good slip seat. Fuel availability obviously is tough, right? Yeah. And it has its limitations compared to a lightweight diesel day cab, but I do feel like it's got a lot of promise, and I'm also excited about what we're seeing, some of the testing with Tesla. You've got a very lightweight battery electric truck that's 500, 600, 700 miles. That's 21,000 pounds, and so you potentially long term would be a good resource on the West Coast. So we're pushing forward with all types of technology. We're not behooved to one. We want to look at battery electric. We want to continue to look at hydrogen fuel cell, and we have unique lanes that all have their own specific needs, right? And so I think that you'll see us with a hodgepodge of trucks over the next couple of years as we continue to expand our efforts. But I want to say 2028 is kind of soft goal. 2028, 2029, it really depends on the landscape in California. Yeah. But I see folks doing it, right? I've seen some great fleets on the West Coast that are really pushing forward with this. And if it's, we decide if it's within our power, we want to make it happen.
Yeah. So so we'll have you back in 2028, probably episode 500, and let's see, right? If it's battery electric,
accountable then, right? Yeah.
Right. Is it battery electric? Is it hydrogen powered, or is it something else that, we're not even thinking of?
That's right.
In 2025. But so how do you balance that? So it sounds like you definitely are, look at the future. You're definitely balancing those two technologies. How do you do that?
It's not easy. It's tough, right? To trying to see the future, and sometimes you pick wrong, right? Our first battery infrastructure for chargers that I picked, that company went out of business 24 months after I paid a lot of money for some chargers, right? Yeah. And so I picked wrong there. And I think that with the sustainability side of it, you're going to see a lot of entrants come and go, right? And so it's tough to weigh out. But ultimately, when we're looking at new tractor technology, we always go to the baseline. What economically, how does it compare to a diesel truck, right? Which is the true benchmark of trucking. And we want to make sure that we can, we're picking technology that's economically viable, right? That doesn't add in 300% cost to our model, because the drayage market, as you guys well know, it's a low cost model, and you can't go to market where you're 30% higher than your competitor, because you're not going to get any business.
Yeah. I mean, that's always the challenge with new technology, because sometimes the best technology isn't the most well-funded technology, right? And so I can see where that would be like, we really love this this works great in our business, but you just don't know, what the runway is on that. So I can appreciate that challenge.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you look really at the truck spend, or, the cost of these zero emissions trucks, especially over the last couple of years, these trucks are $500,000 each,
Yeah.
and you compare that to a used truck that somebody can go buy for $60,000, $70,000. And, it's really not a fair competition. Now I do think that, as time progresses, we're going to see some, scale up and hopefully some good decrease in cost. I know that the Gen 2 model of the hydrogen fuel cell, really is going to come in about half the cost of what I paid. So I'm excited to see that, because as that price lowers, it really will start competing with diesel.
It's a long way from 1977 when Burt Reynolds got $80,000 to buy a new Kenworth for going to pick up a load of Coors beer down in Texarkana, right?
That's right. That's right.
You knew I was going to say it, didn't you, KP?
I was trying to figure out how I was going to be respectful, but yes. So Jim, you've emphasized the need earlier to kind of educate, or maybe some of the challenges in educating customers about sustainable logistics. So what are maybe some of the misconceptions that businesses might have about sustainability?
Well, I think first, that the technology doesn't work, right? I talk to folks all the time. They're like, yeah, I heard that these trucks don't really work. And I have to bring up real facts and figures and show them, hey man, we've done 1 million miles in Southern California with this technology. And then we've got battery electric trucks that we've done more than that. And we've had those for 3 to 4 years. And so I think that there are misconceptions out there that the technology doesn't work. It does work. It has limitations compared to diesel, specifically with cargo weight. And I think that there's a lot of education there with customers. Like, hey, if you want to do something zero emissions, let's talk about your particular cargo, and then where you're going to. And so we kind of have to sit down and through Q&A and really steer in the direction we think it needs to go. I think that the misconception now is, well, sustainability is off the table. We don't have to worry about it. Yes, you do. And so we talk to folks, and we find that a lot of people in the SoCal area specifically aren't really aware of the indirect source rule. And so it's got some pretty deep economic impacts to their bottom line. And so we like to talk through their warehousing options and really understand, if they're looking at that side of it, to understand what the true cost of operating in California is. Mm-hmm. But once you get past that, I think then, the next thing that we get is hydrogen versus electric, right? And so you've got two camps of zero emissions that really don't get along at all, right? They're all have picked their path and they figure that they've got the right way. And so a lot of folks, when we go in, I say, what's a hydrogen fuel cell truck? Well, that's not zero emissions. Yes, it is. It's, zero tailpipe emissions. And then there's a lot of discussion about what color of hydrogen is. Is it gray? Is it blue? Is it green? And then, then they'll come back and they'll say, well, all electricity is green electricity. And it's really not. And so it's kind of an education piece, talking to folks about, where the true source of energy is coming from and how to understand what the true carbon intensity of that energy is.
Because there's a component of, battery electric that has to be taken into consideration. We don't talk about a lot is the after the life cycle of the truck and the battery, right?
100%. Yeah. It's funny. Kind of like your cell phone, right? Our trucks react the same way. So, after 2 to 3 years, all of a sudden your cell phone, it takes a little bit longer to charge and it doesn't hold the charge quite as long. And you see this degradation of battery. And I can tell you that's a reality with Class 8 trucks, right? So the trucks that we have that are now 3.5 years old, they don't function the same way that they did, when they were first new. And really, I don't think anybody has a peg on the true life cycle of these trucks yet. I think it's too early on, and the same with hydrogen fuel cell. How long will those fuel cells last? And then what is the environmental impact of handling these large batteries, after that truck is really done, or what do you do with the hydrogen fuel cell? And I think there's a lot of unknowns out there. And unfortunately, we're going to have to take some risk and really, get to that point. But you're right, Kevin. It's there's a lot of unknown about what happens.
Yeah. So have you guys, you may or may not know, but like the difference in disposal on a battery versus a hydrogen fuel cell. Is there a significant difference in that after the life of the vehicle?
Well, they sold us on the idea that the life cycle of these trucks would be much longer than a diesel truck, right? And so, if we get to the 10-year mark of owning these vehicles and I'm having some problems, I'm going to be pretty upset. But from a fleet operator perspective, I would tell you, we typically cycle our trucks every 4 to 5 years, and so we want the newer technology in the road. We want to capitalize on a higher depreciated value of these trucks. And so it'll be interesting as we approach 5 years with zero emissions trucks to figure out, what we're going to do with those units. And ideally in California, you want to see large fleet operators take these trucks and put them on the secondary market, which would then put a lower cost model truck, for zero emissions in the hands of these smaller owner operators that are operating. And so that's what I'd like to see happen. I think that once you pass that point, then you'll start seeing zero emissions really scale up in California.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. I hope we do see that. That's a great point. So along those lines, Jim, how do you see, or how do you want shippers, BCOs, logistics providers to collaborate better on sustainability? How do you envision that?
You got to have a transparent model, right? So we have decided, last year we were having discussions with customers and, well, we can do zero emissions, we can save you CO2. And we were always getting asked, well, how much? And so we spent a lot of time developing a CO2 emissions calculator for our customers. And now I provide that report to them on a monthly, weekly basis, and they love it. And they're using that to help sell to their C-suite and say, hey, we need to expand these efforts. I think that a lot of times, especially in the drayage world, when somebody asks us for a rate quote, it's always a procurement department, right? And that's the wrong guy to talk to about sustainability, right?
Yep.
They're hyper focused on saving $1. And so we really like to collaborate beyond the procurement guy and say, hey, let me talk to your sustainability folks and let's see what we can do. And I think it's a lot of Q&A. It's really understanding what their challenges are and where they're trying to get to in their journey. And sometimes it doesn't fit, right? I'm looking for a specific customer that wants to walk the walk and really, cares about the environment and or somebody who I can educate and say, hey, this is what we can do for you. So I think collaboration and transparency and everything is important. I think that being able, as a fleet operator, being able to list out my true cost, right, and saying, hey, this is what it really costs for us to acquire these units. Regardless if you get state funding or not, there's a substantial investment that you got to make. And frankly, the customers got to understand that the technology doesn't always work, right? That we've had some cases where last year, all of a sudden I didn't have a source of hydrogen fuel for a couple of days. And that kind of ground my entire operation to a halt for those 2 days. And we've come up with a plan B and plan C since, but technology is not infallible. And that's another thing I tell everybody is, you got to have a little bit of patience.
All right, Jim. Now we get to the crystal ball segment of the of the podcast. Higgins, if you can add some special effects of lights and smoke and all kinds of stuff. But we talked about 2028. We're going to go a little bit further than that. So if we fast forward to 2035, 10 years from now, what's the ideal sustainable drayage industry really look like? Crystal ball.
I'd like to think that it's an environment where a trucking company really has control of its fuel, right? And whether it's solar power or has a really, instead of going to a third party charging network, outside of the yard where there's more behind the fence charging, I think that's critical. It's tough to get to today, right? Our grid in California is just not there yet.
Yep.
But I think that with some investment, it'll be there. I think that ideally long term, you'll see, and again, 10 years down the road, hydrogen will still be around. You'll have a balanced zero emissions environment between battery electric and hydrogen, and folks will be providing their own hydrogen behind the fence, right? I think that reality is not too far away. There are folks that can do it now. I just think it's a very large scale. It needs to get to more of a microgrid status. But I that's kind of my vision for 10 years down the road. We'd like to certainly do. We'd like to have more energy storage on site where we're capitalizing, we're pulling energy off the grid, off peak hours and keeping it in megawatt storage where we can, send that power to our trucks on demand, but not cost an arm and a leg.
All right. We're going to book you for the 1,000th episode in 2035 and see.
Hopefully I will be retired by then. So,
dude,
well, I'll be around. Higgins, yeah.
He's
Higgins
booking me. Jiminy Christmas. I'll be 900 years old.
Oh, man.
So, Jim, this has been really good, but maybe one piece of advice that you would give logistics leaders trying to future-proof their operations right now.
That's a toughie. I off the top of my head, I would say you got to take some risk, right? To be a leader, you got to take some risk. You're going to fall sometimes, and I certainly have with some of my choices with sustainability. But I think that if you wait for others to really come up with the right technology, you're behind the curve, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why we're exploring, we're beta testing everything we can get our hands on. Because I think that first to market sometimes is the best. And I've had folks tell me, there's a difference between cutting edge and bleeding edge, but I do believe that if I get out there first and I can prove technology, it gives me a little leg up on my competition, especially in the early side. So I would say for anybody that's really looking at sustainability and wants to future proof it, you got to start now. Don't sit on your heels. Even when it's tough, challenging times economically in our new freight recession, I still think it's important to get out there and try it, right? Even on a small scale, because in 2 to 3 years from now, once we get past the economic hard times, I think sustainability will then become, a little bit more pushy than it is today. And you're going to have customers that are going to say, why are you now just starting? Right. And so we want to be at that point, hey, these guys have already got it licked.
Yeah. Well, you guys have taken a position, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys have taken a position that this is just the right thing to do.
And it's kind of funny because I'm, like I said, I'm originally from Texas, right? And, Texas, the smell of diesel is like the cologne, the state cologne. So when I first got asked, hey, we need you to move to California and, they're doing battery electric trucks, I laughed, right? I was like, there's no way, right?
Yeah.
And then we get out here, a year into my move to California. If you spend enough time in the Wilmington area or, right around the ports, LA, Long Beach, or you go into Oakland, right around those ports, you see the impact of pollution, right? This is a direct impact for these communities surrounding it. And if you spend any time talking to them, it's real, right? The incidence of asthma or cancer with these guys that are localized right around the port. And I think that I finally had this epiphany that, if it's within our ability to do it, we need to do it, right? We need to become a leader at this, especially if it's not too taxing on you financially. You just gotta put some risk out there. And so it converted me, right? And I all of a sudden I became this guy from Texas that's, trying to push zero emissions, everybody. And my buddies back in Texas laugh at me all the time, but I do feel it is the right thing to do. And again, you're going to stumble and fall every now and again, but if we can put a product out there that really, has limited impact in the environment and the folks in the areas that we're operating, I think that's a victory, right?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not, I'm not the guy who's been standing on the corner being a huge proponent. I've got questions and I've got challenges and everything else around, battery electric and things of that nature, just from a, total life cycle perspective. But you're right. When you go to the port, and I've been down there a lot, when you're down there and the gantry cranes are working and the transitainers are working and the forklifts are working and everybody is rushing in there to pick up their containers, there is a lot of diesel being put out.
Yep.
And I mean, you can smell it for miles.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's it just is a fact.
Yeah, when I talk to folks that have, been in California for all their lives, they'll tell me, man, back in the 80s, early 90s, the smog glare that was all over LA was just remarkable. Mm-hmm. And the impact of what happened in 2008, 2009 with the clean truck rules, all of a sudden you can actually see downtown most days, from the Long Beach area. And I think that's a really cool thing. And the geography of LA and this basin here, it just captures, pollution. And so we've got to do a little bit more than, a typical community to help kind of tamp that down.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be keeping an eye on which direction you guys go over the next few years.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank
hydrogen, battery electric, whatever else comes up, I'll be watching.
Yeah.
Right on.
So Jim, we went pretty far in the future. I'm going to bring it back just a little bit more. So maybe share with our audience a little bit, maybe what IMC Logistics is planning for just, this year, for the remainder of 2025. Anything you want to highlight from IMC Logistics?
Well, sure. We just joined forces with Kuehne Nagel, right? We finalized that in January of this year, and that's been a big change for us. IMC is the nation's leading drayage operator, and then now you've got the world's leading 3PL or freight forwarder kind of joining forces. So we're excited about that. It's been a lot of collaboration. It's been pretty fast and furious. So I think you're going to see some exciting developments from the IMC camp and K&N camp this year. From a sustainability standpoint, we were awarded a pretty large grant in Oakland via the Port of Oakland from EPA, and I'm excited really to get that thing kicked off, right? So we should be one of the larger deployments in Oakland of zero emissions. We've got enough funding for 50 to 90 ZEV trucks. But again, it kind of gets back to chicken and egg. You got to make sure there's some infrastructure up there. But I'm excited about that. I think that's going to be kind of game changing for that community as folks really develop ZEV up there.
That's exciting. That's good stuff, Jim. Well, listen, Jim, we really appreciate this. That's a wrap on this powerful conversation with Jim Gillis, President of the Pacific Region at IMC Logistics, a true pioneer in the move toward sustainable drayage. From his leadership in rolling out zero-emission vehicles to navigating the policy and infrastructure challenges at our ports, Jim reminded us that sustainability in logistics isn't just a goal, it's a responsibility. And his passion, experience, and vision are helping set the standard for what a cleaner, smarter supply chain can look like. If you want to follow IMC's journey toward a zero-emission future or learn more about their sustainability initiatives, head over to imcc.com or follow them on LinkedIn. A big thanks to IMC Logistics for sponsoring today's episode and for being a driving force in creating a more sustainable supply chain. And thanks to our listeners for joining us on Kev Talks Real World Global Logistics. Stay tuned as we continue our sustainability supply chain series, moving the future forward, one conversation at a time.
Appreciate you, Jim.
Now, thank you guys again. Honor.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. If today's discussion inspired you, don't forget to follow, subscribe, rate, and share our podcast.
Remember, every great journey in logistics starts with a single step forward. Let's continue working together to transform the industry.